So coming out of Nintendo's financials, while there was a ton of discussion, of course, around the Switch 2 as it's starting to wrap up its first year on the market, there's also something else to keep in mind coming out of that fiscal year report going into the new fiscal year, and that's where the Switch 1 is sitting specifically in its place in history because yes, the final boss is up for the Switch 1. And that's the PlayStation 2 that got a little bit stronger when Sony sure found like 5 million PlayStation 2 systems, but the Switch, has a chance. And I've wondered if it's going to be able to get there, but we got some news recently that makes me think Nintendo might actually make this happen. And I want to go over that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. So let's take a look. This is over on just a refresher. This is over on Nintendo's investor relations page, where they show how many of each system and software that's sold, and the Switch 1 at 155.92 million units, nearly, of course, 156 million. So for Nintendo to end up overtaking the PlayStation 2, they would need another, I'll even say 4.5 million just for that little buffer, right? With the system in mind. But that would then place it over 160 million. I know there's a lot of people are just kind of joking, but I think there are also some people who are thinking that Sony did it on purpose in the sense that they saw the Switch 1 coming up rapidly. Like Nintendo was coming for the Switch 2, and Jim Ryan was like, "Hold on. We actually sold like 160 million." And then they updated the page. That was actually more so discussing on a podcast some of his great accomplishments that he looks back on in his career. And I mean, he did make the PlayStation brand very, very strong in like Europe. So in his mind, that was that market that he really worked to overtake essentially with the PlayStation brand is what he was thinking of, and he specifically called out the PS2. Still though, sure, they updated it way late and said, no, actually 160 million. There's been math going around for a while as people were trying to guess exactly how many PS2 systems actually sold. And this is like years ago. Like, this has been something that's been discussed since, like 2014 or 2015, something like that. I mean, there are forum threads from it that I've seen from at least 2018. But believe it or not, the consensus is it could be anywhere between 158 and like 162 million. So technically, Sony could show up and say, actually, 162 million. I don't think they will. I think they are just, no, you know what? Nice round number, 160 million. But basically, it comes down to, another 4 to 4.5 million units is what the Switch 1 would need to sell. And I do think a lot of this is going to come down to how long does Nintendo produce the Switch 1. I think it'll still sell, yeah, sure, at a snail's pace maybe each fiscal year, but I do think there's still a market for the Switch 1 because it does represent the lower end of the market. The Switch 2 is about to be coming in at the baseline price, we'll say in the US, at $500. That'll be in September. Well, the Switch Lite represents a system that's at $230 new. And of course, you can find them used for cheaper, but even new, $230. Yeah, that is like the cheapest system you see across the board by a large margin out there right now, and Nintendo would count that as just a Switch sale, of course. Well, check this out. This is a rumor that's going around currently with Nintendo finally returning to India, but with the Switch 1, and I think that kind of threw some people off. They're like, really? Not the Switch 2? Well, the Switch 1, yeah, it's just a cheaper model for a marketplace that I think would actually respond pretty well for the Switch 1. Okay, this is according to a report from Day Zero Media, with Nintendo finally making a comeback in India. The company has largely been absent from the country in recent years, although consoles have been available via the gray market. Nintendo itself hasn't had an official presence. So they also go over like the pricing for it, 20,000 rupees. And I don't really know what that necessarily is in correlation to like the average monthly income there, anything like that. But it would certainly be cheaper than the Switch 2 showing up in India. And of course, large population there. You assume a market that, if it responded well, would probably drive, I'd say, at least hundreds of thousands, maybe millions will see a Switch 1 systems, but at the very least, it's a market that they can continue selling Switch 1 systems to, because there will, of course, be the question around the saturation of the Switch 1, which you have to assume they're there by now at 156 million or so systems that have shipped out into the marketplace. So how long could Nintendo support the Switch One, which that would be with software and just manufacturing hardware. Well, it seems that developers out there in studios and publishers are still kind of on board with the Switch One, and why wouldn't they be? We're in the cross-gen period now, even about to be a year into the Switch Two's life, but there's still a pretty large install size that seem to be buying games. This is one studio, Untold Games, supporting studio behind Batman Arkham Trilogy, It Takes Two, and Split Fiction, believes there's a lot of life left for the original Switch, saying, quote, Switch has a remarkable ecosystem and a genuinely loyal audience, and that combination has a lot of life left in it. The platform has proven that hardware power isn't the only thing players care about, and that's a lesson worth taking seriously. And I do think this is going to be a situation where it does take a while for Nintendo to get people from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2, like all the way around. So this is going to be something where maybe it's even 4 or 5 years in, and then people are starting to move to the Switch 2, although at the trend we're seeing, it makes more sense to buy the system now than later. But maybe you're waiting for a Switch 2 Lite because you really like your Switch 1 Lite. You don't necessarily need the docking functionality or the spare Joy-Cons. You just want all in one piece, a portable device. You're probably going to still be hanging out waiting, I assume, another, I'll say, year and a half to 2 years. I don't necessarily know if that Switch 2 Lite is coming immediately, even though Nintendo, I do think, needs a lower price Switch 2 system, but the Switch 1 might be their lower price system for the next couple of years. I mean, just look at how the Nintendo president Shintaro Furukawa, had discussed this when talking about the sales of Mario Kart World, as one investor did ask about them slowing down in terms of shipments when they weren't part of the hardware bundle because, well, the game is $80. But Furukawa said, while I refrain from talking about the state of sales for individual games, Mario Kart World is an important title that we would like to continue selling throughout the life cycle of Switch 2. Going forward, we will continue to convey its appeal to consumers to expand its popularity as an evergreen title. I believe it is important that we consider how to expand the entire software business, including titles for both Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2, instead of focusing only on sales of Nintendo Switch 2 software, as in, yeah, the Switch 1 software is still going to be around for quite some time. Of course, it's backwards compatible with the Switch 2, but I think to go alongside of that, you would want to continue selling hardware, whether it's in like new marketplaces like in India, or just outright in already even saturated marketplaces in case somebody needs to replace their system. It sounds crazy because why didn't they get Switch 2? Well, maybe it's a Switch Lite that they want, and that's just $230, because even still, Nintendo, for the current fiscal year that we're in right now with their forecast, they believe 2 million Switch systems will sell. Okay, that is almost half of what they did the previous fiscal year. But if they follow along with that forecast, they'll be right up against 158 million systems for the Switch 1, and that would put them at the end of March 2027. The rumor right now, when it comes to them launching in India, would actually be at the beginning of next year or the end of this year. So the fact that they'd be putting that in motion, again, according to the rumor, means that they still have plans to continue manufacturing the Switch 1, I figure, a few years still into the future here, maybe into 28 or 29. Now, the PS2 finished its manufacturing. It was discontinued in terms of manufacturing at the end of 2012, and then also the beginning of 2013, just based on the regions. And then they were just selling through whatever stock they had at different retailers, which means it would have been manufactured for more than 12 years, actually nearly 13 years then. And I mean, by the beginning of March 27, will have been 10 years into the Switch 1 cycle. So let's say Nintendo really does go up alongside the PS2 in terms of the strategy that was done there, or maybe they just need a prolonged cross-gen period because of how expensive the Switch 2 is. It wouldn't shock me if the Switch 1 really did go 12 or 13 years, and you just occasionally see on their forecast, we're going to sell 2 million Switch 1 systems, 1.5 million. And yeah, then it crawls past the 160 million mark. But I'm kind of thinking we're gonna see it happen. I really do. It just when I kind of thought Nintendo would have been backing away from the Switch 1, maybe even a bit faster than they are, which again, it's kind of hanging on there a bit. But that just is sort of also the results of the marketplace right now, where it's $500 to get into Nintendo's new system, their new generation, and that's just not necessarily attainable for many people right now. But if they already have a Switch One, or if they're thinking about getting into, say, the Switch generation, which it's hard to argue for this against the Switch Lite right now because yes, you can also go on eBay and find them for $150 in like new condition, or yes, walk into a Walmart or GameStop or whatever and find one for $230 brand new in the box. And I mean, the value currently with that lineup that's been built over the course of 9 years, it's almost overwhelming to a degree. There's a ton of stuff from Nintendo and third parties. So it wouldn't shock me if people are out there still buying the Switch One like that. But it's going to come down to how long does Nintendo want to support the system when it comes to manufacturing, because I just think based on the price point, it will at least have some interest in the market. And that's the reason I think Nintendo will most likely see 161 to 162 million Switch One systems sold, or at least shipped, when it's all said and done, and most likely becoming the best selling system of all time. Unless Sony all of a sudden finds another 2 or 3 million PlayStation 2 systems in the back, and they just go ahead and tack that on. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below in the comments. Do you believe now that we're seeing, I mean, again, the final boss of the PS2 that Nintendo will be coming for here, do you think they'll get there? Maybe years and years down the road, but will it happen? Will the PS2 finally be dethroned by the Switch? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.